Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Matt, I am the American-Canadian Gamer, and today I want to talk to you about a little game by the name of Spellweaver. Now, Spellweaver is another collectible card game that has been released on a digital platform in the same footsteps of games like Hearthstone. Ever since Hearthstone came out, everyone's like, oh look, these online card games, people love them and they make a ton of money, let's try to make them ourselves. And some have come out that have been almost complete ripoffs, and others have tried to do other things with it to try to differentiate themselves, such as Duelist turning it into more like a tactical RPG card game mix. And Spellweaver is much more traditional than a lot of the ones that we've seen come out lately, even more traditional than I would argue Hearthstone is. And it's because it really kind of mixes the principles of both Magic the Gathering and a little bit of Hearthstone together to create this kind of hybrid game that has elements of both and tries to work on the strengths of both of them, because what you have in the traditional paper side of card games like Magic the Gathering, where it's physical, you have a much more robust card selection and the ideas that you can combine and mix and match different things from different factions, different colors to make a single deck. For instance, in Magic the Gathering, if I want to use a deck that has red, white, and blue creatures in it, I can do that. Whereas in Hearthstone, I'm basically like, I'm going to be a warrior with neutral cards. I'm going to be a shaman, and then have shaman and neutral cards. You can't be a shaman and a warrior in the same deck, whereas in something like Magic the Gathering, you most certainly can. And they're taking that flexibility from Magic and they're combining it with the elements that you see in Hearthstone of letting the computer take control of the different aspects that are very difficult to calculate, such as maybe some random elements or the ability to just keep track of different statistics and different, what's the word I'm looking for, aspects of it, such as the level system that Spellweaver has built into it. They let the computer take care of those aspects that are much more difficult to keep track of in a paper-style game where it's very easy to lose track of everything, then you miss triggers, then everything gets kind of messed up, and it makes it very difficult to understand when you're doing it in a paper setup. But Spellweaver tries to take the complexity of Magic and streamline it a bit with Hearthstone's simplicity and digital computing capabilities, and it tries to make something new. And the question is, does it work? Is it a good game? And to be honest, to answer that question is actually rather difficult, because if Spellweaver, whether or not Spellweaver is a good game is something that's very subjective to the person playing it. It depends on how much background you have in TCGs, in CCGs, and it also depends on exactly what you're looking for and what your preferred styles are. And I will say that it is a very good attempt at a card game. Spellweaver is a very good attempt. It's got some really neat ideas that try to differentiate it, but it does fall flat in a few areas. So first off, let's talk about the differences between Spellweaver and between Magic and Hearthstone. Now, I'm going to probably mostly compare this to Magic because it is more like Magic than it is Hearthstone in every basic way. So everything is basically like Magic. You build a 60-card deck that can have no more than 4 copies of every card except for your basic resource cards. And in this game, they are known as shrines instead of lands. And shrines can belong to one of 6 factions. And there's corruption, nature, wisdom, order, dominion, and rage. Those are the 6 aspects that they can belong to. And they are basically red, white, blue, black, green, and purple. Those are the colors that they come out in. And in Magic the Gathering, if you want to play a card, I actually have lots of Magic cards sitting right here. You'll see that if you want to cast like this card, you need 2 blue mana on the battlefield, or 2 islands or 2 lands that produce blue mana, and then 5 of any color, I couldn't tell what card it was, in order to cast this card. The way Spellweaver works is that you have levels in the different aspects. So if you draw a land card, for instance, let me find a land card here. You can choose to either gain 1 mana crystal like Hearthstone, or you can gain 1 level in that particular aspect. So if I were to draw a forest in Spellweaver, I could choose to either take 1 level in forest or nature in that aspect, or I could take 1 mana crystal and draw a card. So what you're doing is you're trying to find a balance between building up your mana base and building up your levels, and both of them are required in order to play cards. For instance, let's go back to the Alhamaratai Arbiter that I was showing you earlier. In the Spellweaver sense, this would require you to have probably 5 or 7 mana, however you want to look at the card, but you need 2 levels in the blue. in the blue color on this card. You would need to have 2 levels in that plus the mana crystals necessary in order to cast that card. So it's all about finding that balance between taking levels and taking mana and drawing cards. And that's a really neat idea because there are different thresholds and different ways you can play with that. You can make a card be really low costed for what it is, but have a high level requirement in order to kind of balance it out so that it's like, oh, once you get to the late game, this powerful card's only going to cost you 3 mana, but you need to have 3 to 4 levels. And it's a really neat idea. I really like what they tried to do with that there. The problem that it comes out to have is there's not good support for multicolored decks in that game. You have the 6 colors or the 6 aspects, but you don't have any way to really fundamentally work with 2 to 3 aspects or even more than that without really trying to have a really weird mana base available to you because there's no cards that support it. There are no, like in Magic right here, Bounding Krasis. Yeah, Krasis. It is has blue and green in it, and it's mana cost. There's nothing like that in Spellweaver. They're all monocolored. All the cards. Every one of them. They're mono. And I don't like that. It's like, you're going to give this ability to have a more flexible deck system than something like Hearthstone, and then you're going to turn around and say, oh, by the way, there's no support for it. There's also no way to get multiple... I'm looking for cards right now. There's also no way to get multiple different kinds of levels out of one resource card. For instance, let me get another magic card here. Here we go. Tranquil Expanse. This is a very common idea behind dual lands in Magic. Tranquil Expanse is a land that comes into play tapped, so it comes in unusable, and then next turn it untaps, and you can use it to add either a green or a white to your mana pool. Well, they don't have anything similar to that at all in Spellweaver. Instead, you just have the basic resource cards, the shrines, and then you have some skill shrines, which we'll get into, but there's nothing that says, like, either add a red or a green level, and then nothing else. Like, they could have done that. They just have either add a level or gain mana and draw a card, or they have add a level or gain mana and gain a skill. They don't have a card that just says, like, oh, you can add a red or a green or a blue and a white, but nothing else on it. They don't have any good support for dual colors, and that's a real shame because the whole point of that level system seems to be to give you the flexibility that something like Hearthstone and Duelist and other faction-based card games don't allow, and they don't capitalize on that in any way, and I think that is a huge weak point, huge missed opportunity, and something they could have used to really have a selling point as opposed to... I lost my whole train of thought. They could have used that as a selling point when saying, like, look, this is the game you want to play instead of Hearthstone because we have a much more complex deck building system. We can reward your creativity. We can make it so that the deck builders are really the ones that are really the most powerful, and you can build amazing decks that just come out of nowhere and have all these interesting interactions and effects that just make the game crazy. And they didn't do it. They didn't do it for some reason. They had that rich capability at their hands. They don't have dual-colored creatures in there. Like, they have all monocolored creatures. Why can't there be a white and red angel? They have white angels. They have like red dragons and purple elementals and clerics and all these other things. Why can't they have dual-colored creatures at all? They don't. They don't have any dual-color creatures whatsoever. That's another horrible missed opportunity. You don't reward the multi-colored decks at all. Granted, you do gain access to other cards in multicolored decks. When you run 2 colors, you can get some removal from Domination, from Dominion. You can get removal from Dominion, the purple faction. You can get some of the burn from Rage. If you want to be elves, you can get some team support from the white, from the Order. But there's no real reward for it, and that is a huge missed opportunity for that. A couple other things. I made some notes here that I want to talk about. The interface. The interface is kind of meh. It's not bad. It's easy to navigate, I'll say that, but it's really bad at just notifying you when things are happening. There's nothing that comes up and says, hey, it's your turn. When I first started playing, I can't tell you how many times I'd accidentally click on the end turn button, thinking it was the check mark or whatever at the end of my opponent's turn, saying, okay, I have nothing to play at the end of their turn. I would click on the end turn by accident, then it would swap over to their turn without any indication whatsoever. You have to either notice when their turn ends and you draw a card, or there's nothing that comes that says, hey, it's your turn, or it's, hey, it's your opponent's turn. That doesn't happen. And when you win or lose a match, there's no like little victory or defeat noise or anything. It just pops a thing up and just things count out. Your experience and your fame and other things. So that's kind of lackluster. That's kind of meh. The interface is It's not awful, but it's not exciting in any way, and it's not really all that enjoyable. Let's see some other things that I want to have here. We'll get back to some more game mechanics in a second. The free-to-play aspect of it, it seems pretty fair. I've played a little while on. I was able to unlock a couple of decks. You get starter decks as you level up and some other things. You tend to earn gold at an okay rate, it seems. I could be wrong about that in the long run. But when you go to buy packs and you go to buy things, there's no discount when you buy larger bundles of them. Buying like 3 or 5 boosters, I can't remember the exact numbers of them. Buying 3 or 5 boosters, the boosters are the exact same cost as if you buy 10 of them. If you buy a higher amount at once, if you put more money down, you should either get a discount or an extra booster. So I don't get that. Then there's no reason to have multiple choices on buying boosters if they're the exact same cost, just one is more, and that doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me. So the free-to-play is kind of just but it doesn't seem predatory in any way. It just seems kind of meh. I don't really know how else to put it. It doesn't seem very well thought out. It just seems like it's just kind of there. They just wanted to put options up on the screen to make it seem like there was more that you could do and more that you could buy, when in reality, you could just keep buying all the small amounts of packs. And there's lots of other little things you can buy, and you can buy card backs and other things, but it doesn't seem to be too predatory. So we'll leave that aside. It may be a little weird, but it's not bad, is what it seems. Now, that I could be wrong about that down the road. Maybe I just didn't play enough to notice it. But overall, it does seem to be on par with something like Hearthstone. So there's that. Let's see. Some other things. Okay, let's get back to some of the combat aspects of the game. Just some of the aspects of the gameplay aspects of the game. Let's talk about the speed system with creatures. Now, in most card games, pretty much every single card game, creatures will have 2 stats. They will have an attack stat. Oop, I blocked it off. Down in the bottom, they'll have an attack stat, and they will have a health stat or a defense stat. In Spellweaver, they also have a speed stat because creatures can attack other creatures like Hearthstone, and creatures can also block other creatures like in Magic. It's really weird because in Hearthstone, when you go to attack with creatures, you attack one creature at a time until you attack with all your creatures or you decide to end your attack. In Spellweaver, they do it with the Magic style where you have one attack phase where you declare all of your attackers and then you just let the other person block after you declare your attackers. But in Spellweaver, you can declare your attackers against your opponent or against individual creatures. And creatures can also block. They can block someone that's attacking your hero or attacking another creature, unless they themselves are the target of an attack. So if I'm attacking with 3 creatures, and I don't want this one to block, I can attack it with one of my creatures, and the other 2 can go to the face, and that way that big creature can't block. Now, the speed mechanic comes into play here as to where you cannot block or attack creatures with that have higher speed than the creature you want to attack with. So if I have a creature that has an attack speed of 2, I cannot attack or block a creature with speed 3 or 4. I can attack and block creatures with speed 2 or 1. So it gives this idea that you can build small, fast decks that just kind of blow past the attackers. You can build quick blockers, or you can build big, slow guys, because they do kind of have an aspect of this guy is powerful for his mana cost, but he's slow. So even though he's big and powerful and is like a 3 mana 4/4, he's slow and he can be blocked by basically anything, and he can't block anything. So it kind of does affect how you build the decks around that, and I think it's a really neat idea. I think that is an excellent idea. I think it's not executed just as well as it could be yet, but I also think it's something that needs to be tested a lot more before they decide exactly how they want to implement it fully. And I think as they release more cards down the future, after they see how cards interact, after they see how people play, they'll end up being able to do more work with that speed aspect. And I think that's going to end up being a wonderful thing. That's going to probably be a defining feature of the game, and it's something we're going to see leak into other card games, because I think it's actually a really good idea. It's able to mix things up a little bit. That's all about the speed system. I'm looking at my notes here. What else did I want to talk about? Okay. Oh, another aspect of it that's really neat. They have 2 rows where you place creatures. You have the battlefield row, or your front row, and then you have a support row that's right behind them. Creatures in the support row are immune or protected from combat. You cannot directly attack a creature in the support row, and creatures in the support row cannot block. And what you do is you put creatures down there that might have special passives that you want to protect and keep alive, because it might be like, oh, pay 2 mana, deal 1 damage to something, or it has a passive like all your creatures get +1/+1 or something like that. A way to put it in the background to buff everything up or just protect it from everything except your opponent's spells. Spells, of course, can still target the minions or the creatures in the support row. Now, this is where things change. You have flying creatures. Now, flying in this game is different than what it is in Magic the Gathering. In Magic, flying is a form of evasion. You fly over top, and only creatures with flying or certain keywords or abilities can block them. In this, any creature can block or attack a creature with flying, but a flying creature has the ability to attack and block from the support line, and this makes flying creatures very, very, very powerful and very hard to deal with. And I have lost a lot of games to flying creatures simply because there's no way to deal with them. And I don't know if it was because I just didn't have the cards necessary, or because they're just that powerful, and they tend to not be difficult to get out either. Flying creatures are really powerful in the game, and I think that's something they're going to have to really keep an eye on and really try to prevent from becoming too powerful, because I think flying creatures are the easiest way to break that game. It just seems like that right now. And down the road, we could get more cards that help with that, but right now it really feels like the flying creatures are really powerful, really good, and excellent finishers in control decks, and they're not bad in mid-range decks. They're pretty bad in aggro decks because they tend to be big and mana costed and slow, but they're pretty difficult to handle. So I think the flying creatures have the potential of being a nuisance in the game and having the potential of ruining different games for different people if you have a lot of trouble dealing with them and they're very difficult to deal with. But it is another neat little aspect of how they're kind of bending the rules that they've put into place, because that's something that Magic does a lot that Hearthstone doesn't really do. Magic has cards that change the rules of the game. They come in and a card text can overwrite the actual rules of the game while it's in play. That's something that Hearthstone doesn't really do, but it's something that Spellweaver seems to be attempting to do. So it may not be perfect right now, but I think those elements like flying and some of the other stuff they're doing in the long run could have good potential. Other little things, let's see here. Okay, I got that. I'm looking at my notes. I got that. Oh, last thing I really wanted to talk about was the ability to respond to things, because in this game, it's like Magic where you can play cards on your opponent's turn if they are an instant speed card. They do have various actions like a Fireball is 3 mana, deal 3 damage to something, a hero or a creature at instant speed. So at the end of your opponent's turn, you can hit them or a creature they control for 3 or do it in the middle of combat. The weird thing is you can't respond to everything, so it takes a little while to pick up on what you can respond to. For instance, I kind of got bit by this at one point. Rage has a goblin that I put in the support row usually. I think it always goes to support by default. I'm not sure. But it has the ability to use 2 mana, deal 1 damage to a creature or player. Okay, I had a bunch of little creatures out, and I had this idea of like, I'm going to wait for him to use this ability on one of my creatures, then I'm going to play this instant speed card that gives this creature +1/+1, so it would survive the ability. Well, he used his ability, and I didn't have the chance to respond. It didn't let me. I didn't have the capability, so I was like, well, that sucks. I had the order level required, I had the mana required, I specifically put the resources in reserve in order to be able to pull this battle trick to get him to waste 2 mana on this specific ability. It didn't let me do it. I ended up losing my creature, so that's a thing that happens. But again, could be various reasons for that. There could be various things that they could do with, they'd maybe want you to be able to use the creature's abilities and do these little interactions. They don't want you to be able to respond to every little thing, but so far, I don't like that. I like the ability to be able to respond consistently, and maybe that's an element of trying to speed up the games a little bit. Maybe they don't want it to be like paused every 5 seconds like the Magic Online games, but I do think that removing the ability to respond to some things is probably worse than removing the ability to respond to everything. That's just my personal opinion on that point. Speaking of, that brings up other things in my mind. I'm kind of doing this just kind of off the cuff, if you can't tell, but I'm not really good at like writing out big scripted reviews or anything like that, but I just have a lot I wanted to talk about with this. There are alternate win conditions. You do have the ability, if you get to 40 or 50 life, I think it's 40. I think I won a game by getting to 40 life, you automatically win. And instead of each player having so much time per turn, you have a certain amount of time total. I think it's 45 minutes, maybe 40 minutes. And as your turn is going, that timer ticks down. And if that timer runs out, you lose. Once you run out of time, you're gone. And if your deck has no cards left in it and you go to draw a card, you lose as well. So there are different alternate win conditions that you can build your deck around. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that's a really neat way to do it. There's a skills that let you do it. Ooh, I need to talk about skills. There are skills that give you alternate win conditions. Like I had one, if I paid a certain amount of mana with a certain order level and I controlled 4 angels, I just won the game, which is pretty cool. So let's talk about skills. Now, I mentioned the shrines. I'm sorry this is kind of all over the place. I normally don't do this kind of stuff, but like I said, I wanted to talk about this game a little bit. We talked about the shrines where you can either gain a mana and draw a card, or you can gain a level in a certain aspect. Well, there are skills that you can also do this with as well, and there are skills that, when a skill is a resource card, like a shrine, and when you draw it, you can choose to either... Or when you use it, when you play it, not when you draw it. When you play it, you can either choose to gain a level in that particular aspect, or you can gain a mana crystal and gain a skill instead of drawing a card. And skills can be various different things. Like there's one that I used in Dominion, which was sacrifice a creature, draw a card. Like for 2 mana or something like that. And there's one with the angels, where if you have 4 angels and you use the skill ability, which is basically a hero power. I should have mentioned that. Skills are like hero powers. Then if you have 4 angels with this particular one, then you win the game automatically. And all the hero powers, all the skills, have a certain time a recharge time to them. So it's neat. I like that. I like that, the ability to kind of build up your actual hero, your champion, as opposed to just playing random cards. It kind of gives you just options, and options are a good thing. Options are fun. Options make games flexible. They make them entertaining, and I think the game has a lot of good things going for it. I think Spellweaver has a lot of excellent things going for it. The combat is interesting. There's lots of neat cards in there that do some different things. The card art's kind of The card art's okay, but the perspective of the card game is good. It is that kind of angled table thing, which normally I hate, but it's not at too much of an angle, so you can still read and identify everything very well. It's not very straightforward in exactly what you want to do a lot of the times. There is a lot of room to learn, which is both a good and a bad thing. It has, I think, a pretty high learning curve, but at the same time, if you've played TCGs, you're going to be very familiar with a lot of the aspects, especially if you're a Magic player. If you've played Magic, you're going to be very familiar with a lot of how things work in this game in particular. So I don't think I covered exactly every little thing in this game, but there's a lot to get out there. And it's free to play. Give it a try. You might like it, you might not, but overall, I think it needed to come out swinging harder than it did. I don't think it came out as powerful as it should have. It needed to have the support for the dual colors. That's the biggest thing. Having support for dual colors, dual creatures, dual shrines, 3-way shrines, whatever, having all of those elements, then also having a better interface would have been better identification as to whether or not you can respond to different aspects, maybe a little bit better in the tutorial aspect of things, maybe letting you try starter decks for a couple of games before you actually choose them would be pretty good, because it takes a while between getting starter decks, so the ability to maybe try one out before actually committing to it would have been very good, and it needed to come out swinging more. And other games like Hearthstone really didn't have to because they were kind of first into this world, and they're needing to compete with those big juggernauts, and they aren't really doing that. They needed to come out swinging harder. Maybe in a couple of months after, or maybe 6 months, 8 months down the road after an expansion or two, this game might be incredibly competitive against the other games in the format, or other games in the genre, I should say. But until then, it's just kind of You might enjoy it, you might like it a lot, but it always leaves you wanting more because it doesn't feel like the sum of its parts. It feels lesser than both Magic and Hearthstone because it didn't capitalize on a lot of the things that could have made it great. So that's all I have to say about Spellweaver. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you really enjoyed this video. It turned out to be a lot longer than I anticipated, but I had a lot to say. So, as always, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. My name is Matt, and I'll see you next time.